"Hit me," Bruce Lee said. No warm-up, no preamble, no explanation. Just two words, spoken in a voice so calm it felt like the room temperature dropped. Muhammad Ali, 6'3", 236 pounds, the most physically complete fighting machine the 20th century had produced, looked at the man standing across from him. 140 pounds, 5'7", arms that looked like they belonged on a distance runner. Ali had been tested by giants, by men who could move refrigerators, by opponents whose punches had been clocked at forces that bent metal. He had never been asked, by anyone, in any room, under any circumstances, to hit someone who looked like this. He almost laughed. Almost. But something in those eyes stopped him. Something that had no name yet. You need to understand what it meant to say those words to Muhammad Ali. Not to a sparring partner, not to a trainer holding mitts, not to a gym regular with something to prove. To Ali. In 1967, Muhammad Ali was not simply the heavyweight champion of the world. He had already been stripped of that title by governing bodies who feared what he represented politically more than they valued what he represented athletically. But the stripping of a belt does not strip a man of what he is inside a room. What Ali was inside a room was a force that rearranged the air around it. He was 25 years old. He had already beaten Sonny Liston twice in fights that broke the sport's understanding of what a heavyweight could be. He had dismantled Floyd Patterson with a precision that was almost surgical in its cruelty. He had destroyed Cleveland Williams in 4 rounds so systematically and so quickly that Williams' corner didn't fully understand what had happened until they watched the film 3 days later. His jab had been measured by the technology of the era and found to be categorically different in speed from any heavyweight jab ever recorded. Not faster by degrees, faster by a category. His footwork belonged to a different taxonomy of movement than what the sport had previously named as footwork. It was closer to evasion as architecture, the building of a system of angles so complex and so fluid that opponents described fighting Ali as fighting a man who was never quite where he appeared to be. He weighed 236 pounds. He was the most dangerous human being in professional sport. And a 140-pound man who looked like he'd blow over in the Santa Ana wind had just looked him in the eye and said, "Hit me." To understand the request, you have to understand the man making it. Bruce Lee had arrived in Los Angeles with no belt, no headline, no stadium behind him. What he had was a philosophy that was in the process of dismantling every inherited assumption about how human beings fight, move, and use their bodies as weapons. He had been building it for years, not from a single tradition, but from the ruins of every tradition he had examined and found insufficient. Wing Chun, boxing, wrestling, fencing, judo. He had taken each apart the way a mechanic takes apart an engine, not to display the components, but to understand which ones were actually necessary. The ones that weren't necessary, he discarded. What remained was something that had no established name. He would eventually call it Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But in the spring of 1967, it was still being built in real time, still being tested, still being refined against whatever the world sent into the room. He was teaching privately. Steve McQueen came to him, James Coburn, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was not yet Kareem, but was already 6 feet 11 inches of athletic intelligence and who would later say that Bruce Lee was the most physically gifted human being he had ever shared a room with, and Kareem had shared rooms with Will Chamberlain. The private sessions were not performances, they were laboratories. Bruce Lee used his students as data. He watched how people moved, not just trained fighters, but everyone. He watched how the body telegraphed its intentions before it acted on them. He studied the space between a thought and a movement. He mapped the microseconds in which a committed strike could not be recalled or redirected. He built a system designed to inhabit those microseconds. And the reason he said "hit me" to Muhammad Ali, in that quiet, certain voice, with those eyes that gave nothing away, was not bravado. It was data collection. He wanted to feel what Ali's strike felt like before it landed.
The gym was small by any standard that mattered. It sat on the east side of Hollywood, a working space, not a showroom. The walls were bare except for one long mirror that ran the length of the south side. The floor was rubber matting, worn in the center from years of footwork. A heavy bag hung in the far corner, leather cracked and darkened from use. 2 high windows let in afternoon light that hit the dust particles in the air and made them visible. The room smelled like purpose. A mutual contact, a man whose name has never been definitively established in any account, but who appears in multiple peripheral narratives as someone who moved between the film world and the boxing world with unusual ease, had arranged the meeting. He had told Ali about Bruce Lee the way you tell someone about a phenomenon rather than a person. He hadn't used the word better or the word dangerous or any of the words that boxing people use to assess each other. He had simply said, "You should see what this man does with a body." Ali, whose curiosity was as large as his ego and considerably more interesting, had agreed. He arrived with 2 men from his inner circle, no press, no announcement. This was not a public event. It was a private question being asked by a man whose questions were always, ultimately, about the same thing. What is the limit? Bruce Lee was already in the room when Ali arrived, not waiting, working, moving in front of the mirror in the slow, deliberate patterns of a man warming up, not performing, not demonstrating, just maintaining the ongoing conversation between his mind and his body that never fully stopped. Ali walked in. He saw Bruce Lee. He took in the size. He took in the weight. He looked at his men with an expression that contained, briefly, genuinely, without cruelty, the beginning of a laugh. And then Bruce Lee turned from the mirror and looked at Ali, and the beginning of that laugh never finished. This detail appears in every independent account of the afternoon. Every witness describing the moment of first eye contact between the 2 men arrives at a version of the same observation. Not the size, not the posture, not the physical details that you might expect to dominate a description of this particular meeting. The eyes. Bruce Lee's eyes were, and this is the language witnesses reach for, separately, without coordination, across decades, not available, not closed, not hidden, not aggressive, not submissive. Simply not available in the way that most human eyes are available. Most eyes, when you look into them, offer something back. Acknowledgement, assessment, curiosity, challenge, warmth, hostility. They transact. They participate in the social exchange that eye contact normally initiates. Bruce Lee's eyes did not transact. They observed, completely, quietly, without any of the ambient social noise that most human faces produce when they're being looked at by something large and potentially threatening. Ali had spent his entire career using eye contact as a weapon. He had stood across from men who wanted to damage him badly and held their gaze until they looked away, had used that moment of looking away as the first concession, the first defeat, the first crack in the opponent's architecture. He had never, in his life, looked into eyes that simply weren't engaged in that game. Not defiant, not afraid, not challenging, just watching. The way a camera watches, the way a piece of very well-calibrated equipment watches. Ali held the gaze for 2 full seconds. Then he said, into the silence of a room that had become surprisingly quiet for a room containing Muhammad Ali, "They told me about you." Bruce Lee said nothing. Ali tilted his head slightly, the assessment still running, the internal instrument still measuring. "They said you told me someone you could beat any man alive." A pause. "Did you say that?" Bruce Lee looked at him for one more moment of that undivided, untroubled attention. Then he said, "Hit me." Ali blinked. One blink. The slight recalibration of a man whose internal model has just been handed a data point it wasn't prepared for. He looked at his men. One of them, a large man who had been around enough to have seen almost everything, had an expression that was caught somewhere between amusement and the particular attentiveness of someone watching something they know they'll be describing for years. Ali looked back at Bruce Lee. "You want me to hit me?" Not a question. Restating. The way a person restates something when they heard it correctly, but their mind needs one more pass. Bruce Lee said, "Yes." "With what?" "Whatever you want to throw." Ali was quiet for a moment. He was thinking, and Ali's thinking was visible in a way that his public persona usually obscured. His eyes went slightly unfocused. His jaw shifted. A man running calculations. "You understand," Ali said slowly, "that if I hit you, actually hit you, you won't get up for a while." Bruce Lee's expression didn't change. "Then don't actually hit me," he said. "Throw at me. See what happens." Something shifted in the room, because what Bruce Lee had just said was not a boast. It was a hypothesis. He wasn't claiming he could take Ali's punch. He was proposing an experiment. He was saying, "Throw at me and observe. Not predict, not assume. Observe." It was the language of a scientist rather than a fighter. And Ali, who was, beneath all the theater and the brilliance and the championship architecture, a man who genuinely loved the investigation of physical truth, recognized the language. He settled into a loose stance. Not his full boxing stance. Something more casual. A man who was going to demonstrate, not fight. He looked at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was standing in what appeared to be no stance at all. Weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart. The posture of a man waiting for a bus. Ali loaded the jab. Threw it.
The jab did not land. Bruce Lee was inside it. The movement was so compact, so thoroughly stripped of any component that wasn't strictly necessary, that 2 of the 4 witnesses said later they weren't completely certain they'd seen it happen in real time. What they'd seen was Ali's jab extended into empty space, and Bruce Lee was inside the extended arm, closer than he had been, with his right hand resting against Ali's solar plexus. One witness described it as watching a door swing open and finding someone already inside the room. The hand was not striking, it was placed, deliberately, almost gently, a statement rather than an attack. "I was here before you arrived."
Ali pulled his arm back. He looked down at the hand resting against his solar plexus. The hand was still there, completely relaxed, completely calm, completely without drama. Ali looked up. Bruce Lee looked back at him with those camera eyes. 5 seconds of silence. In a room with Muhammad Ali. 5 seconds. His 2 men near the wall had gone entirely still, the involuntary stillness of people watching something that their nervous systems have flagged as outside normal parameters. Ali said, quietly, and with a quality of genuine, unguarded attention that the people in that room had rarely heard from him outside the most private conversations, "How did you do that?" Bruce Lee lowered his hand. "Again," he said simply. Ali threw the jab again. This time with more commitment, not full force, but real. The real velocity, the real extension, the real weight transfer that made his jab different from every other heavyweight jab in the sport. Bruce Lee slipped it, rotated his body a single degree, a fraction, and the jab passed his ear by less than an inch, and his lead hand was touching Ali's chin with 2 fingers before Ali's arm had completed its arc. 2 fingers. On the chin. Gone, before Ali could process the contact. Ali dropped into a lower stance. His feet changed position, the beautiful, instinctive adjustment of a man whose footwork was arguably the finest the sport had ever produced. He threw the jab and the cross together, the combination, the sequence that had ended careers, fast enough that most men never saw the second punch because the first had already told their brain that the crisis was in a different location. The jab grazed Bruce Lee's shoulder, the cross hit nothing. Something touched Ali's ribs on the left side, a sharp, precise contact, there and gone, so fast that Ali's nervous system registered the fact of it before the experience of it. He stepped back. Not retreating, resetting. He was breathing through his nose now, the particular focused breathing of a man who has shifted from demonstration to engagement. His eyes had changed quality, the casual assessment of the first exchanges replaced by something sharper, more present, the eyes of a man who is actually in a problem rather than observing one. He had been in this gym for 12 minutes. He had thrown his best jab at a 140-pound man 4 times. The 140-pound man had not moved back once. Ali straightened. He looked at Bruce Lee with an expression that nobody in that room had a full vocabulary for in the moment, though each of them would spend years afterwards searching for the right words to describe it. It was not humbled. Ali was not a man who humbled easily or completely. It was not threatened. There was no fear in it. It was the expression of a man whose instrument, that extraordinary internal measuring device that had never once in his career given him false readings, was returning data that didn't fit his existing categories. He said, "Now I want you to hit me." Bruce Lee looked at him. "Not a real strike," Ali said quickly, with a slight smile, the smile of a man making a small concession to self-preservation while maintaining the investigation. "Show me what you have. I want to feel it." He planted his feet. He squared slightly. The instinct of a man who has absorbed enormous force before and knows how to be ready for it. Bruce Lee was still. He raised his right fist. He held it 12 inches from Ali's chest. "Watch my shoulder," he said, "not my hand." He held it there. 1 full second. Then the fist moved.
What followed was not a lecture. It was not a master instructing a student. It was not a demonstration with an audience. It was a conversation between 2 people who had each spent their entire adult lives at the absolute frontier of a particular human discipline, and who had just for the first time found themselves in the same room. Ali asked how. Not as a challenge, not as a man looking for the counter, the weakness, the strategic vulnerability. As a student, with the full, clean, undefended curiosity of a genuinely brilliant person encountering something outside their current map. Bruce Lee explained the shoulder. He explained the commitment point, the precise moment in any thrown punch at which the body could no longer recall its intention, the moment of no return. He explained how most fighters, including the greatest fighters in the world, had commitment points that arrived early, long before the fist reached its target. "Your jab," Bruce said, "commits at the shoulder. I can feel it coming before your hand moves." Ali looked at him steadily. "Show me what you mean." Bruce Lee raised his left arm slowly, demonstrating in his own body the sequence of a jab, moving it at a fraction of normal speed, stopping at each joint. He pointed to the shoulder rotation, the micro movement that preceded and announced everything that followed. "There," he said. "That's where it begins. That's where it tells me it's coming." Ali was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And yours doesn't do that." "I try to remove it," Bruce said. "Not perfectly. Nothing is perfect. But the less announcement, the less time you give the other person to be anywhere except where the strike is going. Ali sat with that, rolled it over, working it the way he worked every genuine piece of physical information, not accepting it immediately, not dismissing it, but testing it against his existing architecture to see what it confirmed or challenged. So speed isn't the point, he said slowly. Speed helps, Bruce said. But a fast strike that announces itself is still a strike that can be read. The goal isn't to be fast. The goal is to arrive. The distinction landed in the room like something physical. Arrive. Not travel fast. Arrive. The goal was to collapse the distance between intention and impact so completely that the opponent's system had no interval in which to respond, not to outrun the response, to eliminate the gap in which response was possible. Ali said, "That's what you do." "That's what I try to do," Bruce said. "You did it to my jab 3 times. 4. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, both men almost smiled at the same moment. They sat eventually, both of them on the edge of the mat, the enormous man and the lean man, with the gym around them gone quiet, and the afternoon light shifting through the high windows, and the city outside continuing its indifferent business. They talked for a long time. Ali asked about training, what Bruce Lee's body required to produce what he had seen. Bruce described the grip work, the fingertip push-ups, the striking the Makiwara board until the surface of the skin rebuilt itself into something harder, the filming of his own movements and the frame-by-frame analysis, the years of reducing each technique to its minimum necessary components. Ali described his own training, the footwork drills, the thousands of rounds of Shido boxing, the obsessive refinement of his jab until it had become something the sport had never previously categorized. They were, both of them, describing the same fundamental commitment, the commitment to removing everything unnecessary. Ali with footwork, making himself unfindable by reducing his movement to its purest, most efficient expression. Bruce Lee with striking, making his attacks unannounceable, by removing every component that served preparation rather than impact. Different disciplines, different scales, different physical expressions, the same underlying principle. At some point in the conversation, Muhammad Ali said something. It has been recounted by witnesses with the careful precision of people who recognized in the moment they heard it that they were hearing something they would carry for the rest of their lives. He said, "You know what you are." Bruce Lee waited. "You are the answer to a question I didn't know fighting was asking." Silence. "I always thought the question was, how big? How fast? How hard? I spent my whole life answering that question." He paused. "You're answering a different question entirely." "What question?" Bruce asked. Ali looked at him. "How little?" He let that sit in the room. "How little do you need? How little motion? How little space? How little announcement?" His voice was quiet and certain. "You stripped it down further than I thought stripping down went." Bruce Lee was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That's the only direction worth going." The thing nobody expected was not the 1-inch punch. It was not the intercepted jabs. It was not the silence. It was not the frank and genuine conversation that followed. The thing nobody expected, the thing that every witness in that room identified separately and independently as the moment they knew this afternoon was genuinely historic, was much simpler. At some point, late in the conversation, Muhammad Ali asked Bruce Lee to teach him something. Not to demonstrate, not to explain, to teach. "Show me how to read the shoulder," he said. "The announcement thing. Show me how you see it." And Bruce Lee, without ceremony, without hesitation, without any of the conditions or qualifications that a lesser man might have attached to the moment, stood up and showed him. He had Ali throw his jab in slow motion, again and again, while Bruce stood to the side and pointed, each time, precisely, to the exact moment the shoulder committed, the microsecond of announcement, the leading edge of the intention before the intention became action. Ali threw the jab 30 times, slowly, carefully, watching Bruce's finger each time, learning to see what he was being shown, training his own eye, that extraordinary athletic eye that had read opponents so well for so long, to see a layer of information it hadn't previously been calibrated to receive. By the 15th repetition, something had shifted. By the 25th, Ali drew the jab and stopped it mid-arc, stopped it himself, pulled it back, because he had felt for the first time his own shoulder commit before his arm had moved. He stood still for a moment. "I felt it." Bruce Lee nodded. "Now you know what I'm reading."
he said. Ali threw the jab again, and again. Each time he was feeling, from the inside, for the first time in his career, the announcement his own body had always been making, the signal his opponents' bodies had been receiving for years. Seeing himself from the outside, through the window Bruce Lee had opened. His men near the wall were very still. They understood, without needing to articulate it, that they were watching Muhammad Ali learn something. That was not a thing they had seen before.
The afternoon ended without ceremony. No formal conclusion. No handshake staged for an absent camera. No summary statement made for the record. Ali stood. Bruce Lee stood. They looked at each other for a moment, in the way that two people look at each other when the conversation has gone further than either of them planned, and there is no clean way to close it. Ali said, "I'll think about what you showed me." Bruce Lee nodded. "Think about the announcement," Bruce said. "And everything. Not just the jab." Ali looked at him. "Everything announces itself," Bruce said, "if you know how to read it." Ali held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the door. He stopped once, at the threshold, hand on the door frame, and looked back across the gym at Bruce Lee, who was already turning toward the mirror, already returning to the slow, deliberate work that had preceded the afternoon and would continue long after it. Ali watched him for a moment. Then he walked out, into the ordinary Los Angeles afternoon, into a city that had no idea what had just happened in a small gym on its east side. Ali's men did not speak on the drive back. Ali sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at the city moving past and said nothing for so long that one of them, a man who had been with Ali through every significant moment of his career to that point, said it was the longest he had ever seen Ali go without speaking, in any vehicle, in any context, under any circumstances. When he finally did speak, he said one sentence, not to anyone in particular, to the window, to the city, to himself. "That man is the most honest fighter I have ever been in a room with. Not the fastest, not the most dangerous, not the most skilled, the most honest." Because that was what Bruce Lee's entire system was at its core. An act of radical honesty about what fighting actually was. Stripped of tradition, stripped of performance, stripped of the accumulated weight of systems that had continued beyond their usefulness because nobody had had the courage or the clarity to examine them directly. Bruce Lee had looked at fighting the way a scientist looks at a natural phenomenon, not with inherited assumptions about what it was supposed to be, but with the clean, demanding question, what is this actually, when you remove everything that isn't it? And what remained after all that removal was something so pure and so precise and so stripped of pretension that Muhammad Ali, a man who had himself stripped his sport down to its most essential genius, recognized it as the same project he had been conducting from the other direction. Two men, two disciplines, the same question. What is it when there's nothing left to take away? Bruce Lee's notebooks from this period have been studied by martial artists, philosophers, and sports scientists in the decades since. The entries dated to the weeks following the meeting don't reference Ali by name. They reference a problem, the problem of scale at the intersection of principle. He wrote, "There is a point at which physical gifts operate beyond the reach of technique. Not because technique fails, but because the base from which technique operates is so large that the margin available to technique is reduced. The question is not whether principle holds. It does. The question is whether the interval is sufficient." He wrote, in a separate entry, "Today I felt what it is to read a body that has almost no announcement left in it. Almost. The shoulder still speaks, but it speaks very quietly, and the voice behind it is enormous. And then, below that, underlined twice, almost is the only frontier worth standing at." He increased his training intensity in the weeks that followed. Not in volume. He was already training at volumes his students found difficult to comprehend. In precision. He reduced the commitment point in his own strikes by a fraction that, to an untrained eye, would have been invisible. He refined the shoulder initiation until it was smaller than it had been. He worked on the Chisao sensitivity drills until his ability to read incoming force through contact had increased by a degree that his students noticed inspiring and couldn't fully explain. He was answering the question.
The question Ali had named without knowing he was naming it. How little? How little announcement? How little motion? How little interval between intention and arrival? The answer was, always less than you currently have. The frontier was always one reduction further than wherever you were standing. Bruce Lee died in 1973. He was 32 years old. He left behind films that changed how the world thought about Asian identity on screen. Philosophical writings that martial artists and movement scientists still argue about. A system that seeded every combat discipline that came after it. The DNA of Jeet Kune Do, visible in mixed martial arts, in modern boxing coaching, in the way every serious fighter now thinks about economy of motion and the elimination of telegraphing. His 1-inch punch was eventually measured in controlled laboratory conditions. The force it generated, transmitted across 1 inch of travel, was equivalent to a conventional strike powered by several feet of acceleration. The biomechanics are understood now. The sequential kinetic chain firing from ground through every joint to the point of contact, the whole body activation compressed into a fraction of the distance that conventional physics would say is necessary. It is science now. In that gym in 1967, to the 6 people in the room, it felt like something older than science. Muhammad Ali lived until 2016. In his final years, quieted by Parkinson's, the great voice reduced to something softer and more interior, he gave an interview when a journalist asked, almost as an aside, whether Ali had ever encountered a physical situation that genuinely surprised him. Not in a ring, not in training, in a room. Ali was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the interviewer thought the question had been lost. Then Ali said, in the careful, effortful voice of his last years, "There was a man. Small man. Showed me something I didn't know was possible." The interviewer waited for more. Ali looked at the camera. Or past it. "He showed me you could hit a man before the man knew you were going to hit him. Not because you were fast. Because you removed the part where you decided." He paused. "I never forgot that." The story is told as a confrontation. Ali tested Bruce Lee. That's the frame. That's the title. That's the shape the narrative takes when it's compressed into something that travels. But that's not what it was. What it was, what every witness in that room confirmed, in their own language, across decades, was something rarer. It was 2 giants, moving in opposite directions across the same frontier, running into each other in a small gym in Hollywood on a Tuesday afternoon in 1967. Ali had been moving toward economy for years without naming it that way, stripping his footwork, his defense, his countering, until what remained was something so fluid and so complete that the sport had never produced language adequate to describe it. Bruce Lee had been moving toward economy his entire adult life, removing from every technique every component that served appearance rather than function, until what remained was strikes that had no beginning that could be read and no excess that could be countered. They were the same project, expressed through different bodies, different scales, different disciplines, but the same underlying question asked with the same relentless honesty. What remains when everything unnecessary is gone? Ali's answer was a body that could not be found, that danced through the geometry of a fight like water through fingers, always in the exact right place, never where the danger was pointing. Bruce Lee's answer was a strike that could not be predicted, that arrived without announcement, without arc, without the interval in which a human nervous system could be warned and could respond. Both answers were correct. Both were incomplete without the other. Bruce Lee said many things that have outlived him. He said, "Be water." He said, "Absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, add what is essentially your own." He said, "It is not daily increase but daily decrease, hack away at the inessential." That last one is the key to everything in this story. Daily decrease. Not accumulation. Reduction. The courage to keep removing things, techniques, assumptions, traditions, the comfortable weight of what has always been done, until what remains is only what is true. The 1-inch punch was not the product of adding something to a striking. It was the product of removing everything that wasn't the strike itself. The interception was not the product of adding a defensive move. It was the product of removing the reaction time between reading and responding until the two were the same thing. Muhammad Ali, that Tuesday afternoon in a small Hollywood gym, walked in expecting to find a curiosity. He found a mirror. A man who had pursued the same question he had pursued, with different tools, in a different direction, from a different starting point, and had arrived at an answer so pure and so stripped and so honest that Ali's own instrument, that extraordinary internal measuring device, had gone quiet in the presence of it. He walked in as the greatest heavyweight in history. He walked out as a student. Not diminished. Enlarged. That is what genuine mastery does when it meets genuine mastery. It doesn't reduce either one. It expands both. 6 people were in that room. The footage was ever released. Because there was no footage. There was only an afternoon, and 2 men, and the permanent, private, unfilmable fact that they had found each other at the frontier. That place where everything unnecessary has been removed, and only the essential remains, and had recognized in each other the same destination approached from opposite ends of the earth. How little? That was the question. That was always the question. And Bruce Lee had removed more than anyone before him had removed,
had gotten closer to the irreducible core of what combat actually was, and had shown it, quietly, in 1 inch, to the greatest fighter who ever lived. Who didn't expect it. Who laughed. Who went silent. Who asked to be taught. That reaction. That laugh, that silence, that willingness to be taught, may be the greatest thing Muhammad Ali ever did. Because it takes a certain kind of greatness to recognize greatness that looks nothing like you. And it takes a certain kind of genius to know when you're in the room with something real, to stop talking and start listening. If this story moves something in you, if the idea of two legends finding each other at the frontier struck something true, then you already know what to do. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because this channel exists for exactly these rooms, the ones with no cameras, no headlines, and no clean way to close the door behind them. Subscribe. And never miss the real story.